options. Enabling the front panel. The front panel is shown on the module itself. By default, the front panel is disabled. To enable it, select the module, then click the GUI button. You can also right-click on the module and select Enable Front Panel. If you resize the module, the front panel will resize accordingly. Editing the front panel. When you place knobs, sliders, and other controls inside a module that has a front panel, then these items will instantly appear on the front panel. However, everything will be stacked up in the top left corner. In order to arrange the items, you need to unlock the front panel. First, select the module, then click the padlock button on the action panel. You can also right-click on the module and select Edit Front Panel, or hold Ctrl and press C. The front panel will stay unlocked until you lock it again. However, you will only be able to edit the panel while the module is selected. When the module becomes deselected, it will operate as if the panel was locked. Selecting. You can select items in the front panel in the usual way by clicking on them. If you hold Shift, you can click to add or remove items from the selection. You can also click on an empty part of the front panel and drag to select all items in the rectangular area. To select all the items, you can use Ctrl+A. If one item is underneath another, you can hold Alt and click to alternate between selecting the top item and the one below. Selection info. Either above or below the selected items, you will see some text showing information about the selection. The first part, this is the module names for the items in the selection. The second part shows you the coordinates of the top left corner of the selection. The coordinates are in the form X, Y, followed by SQR or PX. If SQR is showing, then the coordinates are in grid squares. If PX is showing, then the coordinates are in pixels at the default zoom level. You can switch between grid squares and pixels by clicking on the selection info text. Moving. Having selected items, you can then move them by dragging them around. By default, the position snaps to the grid, but you can prevent this by holding Ctrl as you drag. You can also use the cursor keys to nudge a selection by one grid square at a time in any direction. If you hold Ctrl while nudging, you will move a distance equivalent to 1 pixel at the default zoom level. If you zoom in or out, then you will move by a distance that is equivalent to 1 pixel at the current zoom level. This allows you to have ultra-fine control over the placement of items on the front panel. Resizing. You can resize front panel items. This works in the same way as for components in the schematic. First, select the item you want to resize. The bottom right corner of the selection will show a blue resize control. Click and drag this to resize. Note that because each item in the front panel is actually the front panel of a module somewhere lower down in the hierarchy, resizing an item will resize the corresponding module in the schematic. Jumping. If you want to jump straight to the module that is represented by a front panel item, then all you need to do is double-click on it. Draw order. If you have several items that overlap with each other, then you can determine which ones appear on top of the others by using the order menu. Right-click on the selected item or items, and a pop-up menu will appear. You can then choose whether to bring a selection forward in the draw order or send it backwards. You can send the item straight to the back or bring it to the front. Out of view items. It is possible for panel items to move out of view. This can happen when resizing the panel or when copying and pasting modules. When this occurs, you will see red markers on the edge of the panel's exterior. These also indicate the location of the items. To get the items back into view, simply right-click on the module and select Bring Panel Items into View. This option is also on the schematic menu on the menu bar. Group items. Sometimes front panel items are grouped together. This is determined by the way that the modules are constructed. We'll talk about how this comes about later on. So for now, we'll just talk about what happens when it occurs. Group items are indicated by a thin dotted line around the items. The only way that grouped items behave differently from those that are not grouped is that they are constrained to appear in the same order relative to each other. For example, if you send one item in the group backwards, all the other items in the group will move backwards too. Client area. On occasions you may need to change the size of the front panel without changing the size of the module. This can happen when the number of module inputs or outputs imposes a minimum size on the module, but you want the height of front panel to be smaller. When the front panel is unlocked, you will see a thick dark gray border around the panel edge. This defines the client area. You can drag the borders around to change the size of the client area. When an edge is moved from its standard position, it changes to a darker gray color. Note that when this happens, the edge becomes detached from the module boundary and will not resize when the module resizes unless it is forced to do so. You can reattach an edge to the module by dragging it back to its original position. Hiding the front panel. Sometimes you want a module to have a front panel, but you don't want to display it. This may be because it is too big and you want your schematic to be compact. You can hide the front panel by minimizing the module. First select the module, then click on the toggle minimize button on the front panel, or right-click on the module and select minimize front panel. The module will appear as it would be if no front panel were present. You can maximize the module again to show the front panel if you wish by performing the same action. Visibility in parent module panels. There are some circumstances under which you don't want a module's front panel to appear in parent module front panels. For example, you may be using a knob to control a variable for experimentation purposes, or you may want to hide a background image to stop it from getting in the way while you arrange other panel items. You can hide a module by selecting the module and clicking on the I button in the Action panel, or you can right-click on the module and select Show in Parent panel. The I button will show with a strike through to indicate that the module will not be shown in parent module front panels. The Show in Parent panel operation will work on multiple selections too. Properties. We've already seen how to access and change the properties of the module, but how do they get there in the first place? In this section you'll learn how to add properties to your own modules. Enabling the Properties panel. To enable the Properties panel, all you need to do is select the module and click the P button on the Action panel. You can also right-click on the module and select Enable Properties. Adding property items. The items on the Property panel each map onto a particular component somewhere within the module or its sub-modules. There are 6 different types of components that can be enabled for display on the Properties panel. They are int, float, string, boolean, index selector and trigger button. To enable one of these components for display on the properties, right-click on the component and select Property. You will see a small tag with the letter P in the middle appear in the bottom right corner of the component. This indicates that this component is a property and will be represented by a control on the Properties panel. If you add a label to the component, this will be used on the front panel to identify the component. If you now go back to the Properties panel, you will see the property control for the component. Control types. Each of the 5 property-enabled component types has a control that represents it on the Properties panel. There are just 3 different types of control. Float, int, and string components are represented by edit controls. These have a label, which takes its text from the label of the component. Boolean components are shown as a checkbox. Again, the label for the checkbox uses the text from the label of the Boolean component. The trigger button component is represented by a button. The button text is taken from the label assigned to the trigger button component. The index selector component is used for selecting from a list of options, so this is represented as a drop-down list. The component label once again supplies the text for the control label.